How many continents are there? It seems like a simple question, one you might have learned the answer to as a small child pointing a finger at a colorful map. You might confidently say 7, or perhaps 6, maybe even 5. And here's the marvelous thing. You could be right in every case. The number of continents on our planet is not a fixed scientific fact like the number of moons orbiting Mars. Instead, it is a human story, a convention shaped by history, culture, and the very way we choose to see our world. It reveals that our understanding of the planet is as much about our own perspectives as it is about the physical land itself. The answer you give often depends entirely on where you went to school. A child in China, for instance, learns the same 7-continent model common in the United States and the United Kingdom. But cross the globe to parts of Europe or South America, and the lesson changes. There, students are often taught that there are 6 continents. This isn't because the land has shifted or cartographers have made a mistake. It is because different cultures draw the lines on our world map in different places. This simple classroom difference opens up a fascinating window into how human societies categorize and understand the magnificent terrestrial tapestry of our shared home. This variance can be quite a surprise. To begin our journey, we must first ask a fundamental question. What truly is a continent? In the simplest terms, a continent is a very large, continuous expanse of land, ideally separated from other large landmasses by a significant body of water. Think of Africa, or consider Australia. This definition seems straightforward enough. It gives us a solid foundation to build upon. However, nature rarely adheres to our neat and tidy human rules. The world's geology is wonderfully messy. If we strictly follow the rule of separation by water, our map begins to look very strange indeed. North and South America are connected by a thin ribbon of land, the Isthmus of Panama. Africa and Asia are joined by the Isthmus of Suez. If we are absolute purists, Europe, Asia, and Africa might be one gigantic supercontinent. This would leave us with only 4 continents: Afro-Eurasia, America, Antarctica, Australia. This is where the human element comes into play. By convention, we treat narrow land bridges as dividers. The Panama Canal, the Suez Canal have physically severed these connections. But the decision to divide them was made long before those canals existed. For many people, particularly those educated in English-speaking countries, China, and India, the world is neatly divided into 7 distinct continents. The names are as familiar as a nursery rhyme: North America, South America, Europe, Asia, Africa, Australia, Antarctica. This model is perhaps the most widely taught globally. It relies on a combination of geographical and cultural separations. It divides the Old World into Africa, Europe, Asia, and it splits the New World into North America, South America, acknowledging the distinct histories and cultures that have blossomed in each hemisphere. The logic behind the 7-continent system is appealing in its clarity. It separates the Americas at the narrow Isthmus of Panama, creating 2 continents where diverse civilizations, from the Inca to the Maya, developed in relative isolation for millennia. Similarly, it divides Africa from Asia at the Isthmus of Suez. The most curious division in this model, however, is the one between Europe and Asia. There is no ocean separating them. Instead, the boundary is traditionally drawn along the Ural Mountains in Russia. For many of us, especially in the English-speaking world, the number 7 is deeply ingrained in our geographical understanding. From our earliest school days, we learn to recite them. North America, South America, Europe, Asia, Africa, Australia, and Antarctica. It's a fundamental piece of knowledge, a framework for how we picture our planet, as solid and certain as the fact that the Earth is round. But what if that framework isn't universal? What if the map in a classroom in Moscow or Mexico City tells a different story? It turns out the seemingly simple question, how many continents are there, has a surprisingly complex answer. We're about to discover that a vast number of people see the world and its great land masses quite differently. This isn't just a minor disagreement, it's a fundamental difference in perspective taught as a standard curriculum. In many parts of Eastern Europe, including the vast expanse of Russia, and in countries all across South America, the standard lesson in geography class teaches that there are 6 continents, not 7. But here is the delightful twist. They don't agree on which continents to merge. They do not arrive at the number 6 in the same way. This divergence reveals 2 distinct philosophical approaches to grouping the world's great land masses. It highlights the core ambiguity of what a continent even is. Is it a purely physical, contiguous body of land defined by geology? Or do history, culture, and politics play a role in drawing these invisible lines on our maps? Both six-continent models attempt to answer this, seeking a more logical grouping based on physical geography. However, their logic leads them down two separate paths. They each identify a flaw in the seven-continent model, a place where the lines feel arbitrary and artificial, but they focus on entirely different parts of the globe to make their case for a merger. Let's first travel to the east. The first version of the six-continent model, widely taught in Russia, Eastern Europe, and also Japan, takes aim at the division of the Old World. In this view, the separation of Europe and Asia is seen for what it truly is, a historical and cultural construct, not a geographical reality. This distinction dates back to the ancient Greeks, who used the waterways of the Aegean and Black Seas to delineate the lands to their east and west. But from a modern geological standpoint, this separation makes little sense. Geographically, Europe is not a distinct landmass. It is in fact a collection of peninsulas jutting out from the western edge of the immense Asian landmass. They both sit atop the same single continuous tectonic plate. There is no sea between them, only a gentle ancient mountain range. The traditional border, the Urals, is geologically unimpressive. It's a heavily eroded range with an average elevation of only 300 to 600 meters, easily traversed throughout history. It's less of a barrier and more of a gentle wrinkle on a vast sheet of rock. Therefore, from this perspective, it is far more logical to combine them into a single, massive supercontinent, Eurasia. With Eurasia as one, the other continents remain as they are in the seven-continent model, each clearly defined by the oceans surrounding them. So the full list becomes Eurasia, the vast cradle of civilizations. Then Africa, connected by a tiny land bridge but largely separate. North America, a distinct landmass in the west. South America, its southern counterpart. Australia, the island continent. And finally, the frozen expanse of Antarctica at the pole. 6 continents in total. Now, let's cross the Atlantic to explore the second six-continent model. This version is prevalent throughout Latin America, from Mexico to Argentina, and is also taught in some parts of southern Europe, like Spain and Greece. Here, the geographical scrutiny is not on the Old World, but on the New. The term America itself was first applied by European explorers to the entire landmass, not just a northern or southern part. In this model, North and South America are not considered two separate continents, but rather two subcontinents of a single, unified landmass, America. The logic is compellingly simple. They are physically connected. The Isthmus of Panama forms a continuous land bridge between them, while the Panama Canal, a man-made marvel of engineering, now cuts through this isthmus. Geologically, it's one uninterrupted piece of crust. This creates a single, colossal landmass stretching nearly 15,000 kilometers from the icy shores of the Arctic Ocean down to the windswept tip of Tierra del Fuego. Beyond the physical connection, this view is powerfully reinforced by a shared history and culture. The common experience of European colonization, the subsequent struggles for independence, and the dominant linguistic heritage of Spanish and Portuguese create a powerful sense of a shared continental identity, particularly within Latin America. In this model, the Americas are united, while the Old World continents remain divided. So the list becomes America, the great landmass of the Western Hemisphere. Then Europe, maintaining its distinct cultural identity from Asia. Asia, the largest and most populous continent. Africa, the cradle of humanity. Australia, isolated in the south, and the icy desert of Antarctica. Once again, a total of 6 continents, but arrived at through a completely different merger. To truly understand our world, we must sometimes challenge the maps we hold in our minds. Let us look more closely at one of the most fundamental of these, the grand concept of Eurasia. It's not merely a geographical term. It is a profound physical reality, a single sprawling continent that our historical conventions have cleaved in two. This division, as we'll see, tells us more about human history and perception than it does about the planet itself. From a purely geological standpoint, viewing this landmass as one is the only arrangement that makes sense. Our planet's surface is a mosaic of massive, rigid slabs of rock called tectonic plates, which float and drift upon the semi-molten mantle beneath. It is the collision and separation of these plates that sculpts our world, raising mountains and opening oceans. And when we examine the Earth's crust, we find no fault line, no tectonic boundary, separating Europe from Asia. They are fused together, riding as one on the enormous Eurasian plate, a colossal piece of lithosphere that stretches from the mid-Atlantic ridge to the eastern edge of Siberia. This plate is a true giant, bordered by the North American, African, Arabian, Indian, and Pacific plates. The dramatic collisions with the Indian and Arabian plates, for instance, have given us the towering Himalayas and the Zagros Mountains, true geological divides. Between Europe and Asia, however, there is only continuity. Imagine a journey across its breadth. The land flows unbroken, a continuous tapestry of landscapes. From the wave-battered Atlantic coast of Portugal and France, you could travel east across the fertile North European plain, a vast expanse that has been the stage for so much of human history. The terrain rises gently as you cross the ancient, weathered Ural Mountains and then unfolds into the immense Siberian taiga, the largest forest on Earth. Continuing eastward, you would traverse great rivers, vast wetlands, and finally reach the volcanic, fog-shrouded Pacific shores of Russia's Kamchatka Peninsula. Throughout this entire journey of over 10,000 kilometers, you would never cross a significant geological barrier separating one continent from another. So, to a geologist, drawing a continental boundary at the Ural Mountains is profoundly arbitrary. These mountains, while long, are geologically ancient and heavily eroded. Their average elevation is a modest 600 meters, a mere ripple on the Earth's crust compared to the active, soaring ranges that mark true plate boundaries. It makes as much scientific sense as drawing a line down the middle of Africa, which rests almost entirely on the single African plate. The physical evidence is undeniable. The land is one, and what a land it is. This vast supercontinent is the cradle of civilizations and home to over 5 billion people, nearly 70% of the entire human population. Within its bounds lie the dense population centers of China and India, the historic cities of the European Union, and the immense expanse of Russia. It is a place of staggering diversity, encompassing thousands of languages and cultures, from the fjords of Norway to the shores of Vietnam. It is the birthplace of every major world religion, and the stage for countless empires that have risen and fallen. So where did this idea of two separate continents come from? It is a ghost of cartography, a legacy of the ancient world. The concept was born in the minds of early Greek mariners and thinkers. Their known world was small, centered on the Aegean Sea. Looking out from their homeland, they gave names to the lands they could see. The lands to their west they called Europe, and the lands to their east, Asia. The names themselves likely derive from ancient Semitic words for sunset and sunrise, west and east. For these sailors and geographers, the division was not an abstract line on a map, but a very real, physical separation. The narrow, strategic waterways of the Bosphorus and the Dardanelles, which connect the Aegean to the Black Sea. This was the edge of their world, a tangible border between us and them, the familiar and the exotic. But as geographical knowledge expanded, this simple water-based division became untenable. Geographers knew there was a vast continuous landmass to the north. The problem was where to draw the line. For centuries, the boundary shifted, with some cartographers using the Don River. The line we use today was largely cemented in the 18th century, not by a geologist, but by a Swedish military officer in the service of the Russian Tsar, Peter the Great. This officer, Philip Johann von Strahlenberg, proposed the Ural Mountains and the Ural River as the boundary. This was politically convenient for a modernizing Russia, which sought to anchor its identity firmly in Europe. And so, this arbitrary line was stretched northward, settling on a geologically unremarkable mountain range and a modest river. It is a line born of politics and history, not of rock and soil. For a citizen of the world's largest country, Russia, this distinction can feel particularly abstract. Someone living in Moscow, west of the Urals, is considered a European, yet they can board the Trans-Siberian Railway and travel for days, crossing thousands of kilometers of their own country, to find themselves in Asia. The only marker of this momentous continental crossing is often a simple obelisk by the tracks. The language, the flag, the nation remains the same. This duality is at the heart of Russia's identity. Is it European, Asian, or a unique Eurasian civilization unto itself? And Russia is not alone. Turkey is famously split by the Bosphorus, with Istanbul being the only major city in the world to span two continents. Kazakhstan, too, is a transcontinental nation, a bridge between these two worlds, defined by a line that exists more in our books than on the Earth itself. Now, let us turn our gaze to the other side of the world, to the great land masses of the Western Hemisphere. In the seven-continent model, they are split into North America, South America. The dividing line is the border between Panama and Colombia. The separation is often justified by tectonic plates, North American plate, South American plate, which are slowly moving apart. Cultural and linguistic differences are stark. North America, predominantly English-speaking; South America, overwhelmingly Spanish-speaking, Portuguese-speaking. But for hundreds of millions, the division feels artificial. From their perspective, the Americas are one. The land is connected. The Isthmus of Panama, a natural land bridge joining them for millions of years. You could, in theory, walk from Alaska to Argentina. That geographical continuity is the main argument for a single American continent. In many languages, Spanish, Portuguese, French, the whole is simply called America or Amérique. A child in Brazil or Colombia learns America as one continent. The view is ingrained in Latin American culture and identity. There is yet another way to count the continents, one that is perhaps the most symbolic of all: the five-continent model. This is the version represented by one of the most recognizable symbols on Earth: the Olympic rings. The 5 interlocking rings, blue, yellow, black, green, red, were designed in 1913 by Baron Pierre de Coubertin. Each ring was intended to represent one of the world's parts, or continents. But which 5? The model adopts a simple rule. It counts only the inhabited continents. Europe, Asia, Africa, America, Australia. Oceania, Antarctica is left out. Why? It has no permanent human population. Scientists live there temporarily. Support staff live there temporarily. No one is born there. No country truly calls it home. The Olympic ideal focuses on the continents where people actually live. It's based on humanity, not geology or politics. A people-centric view of our planet. The narrator, Vo. So why can we not simply agree? It seems like a straightforward question, one that should have a single, universally accepted answer. How many continents are there? Yet, as we've seen, the answer you get depends entirely on who you ask and where they're from. The reason for this global disagreement is that the very concept of a continent isn't a simple fact of nature. Narrator, Vo. Instead, it's a rich and complex tapestry, woven from many different threads of logic and tradition. These threads, geography, history, culture, and convention, are deeply interwoven, often pulling in different directions, creating the beautifully varied maps of the world we see today. To understand the different answers, we need to gently pull on each of these threads and see where they lead. Narrator, Vo. The first and most obvious thread is, of course, geography. The fundamental definition we often start with is that a continent is a large, continuous landmass, ideally separated from other landmasses by a significant body of water. Narrator, Vo. The sheer size and separation of these landmasses give us our basic template. From this perspective, some cases seem clear-cut. Narrator, Vo. Australia is an island continent, a massive landmass entirely surrounded by water, its long isolation giving rise to a completely unique ecosystem. Narrator, Vo. Antarctica is even more isolated, a continent of ice locked away at the bottom of the world, separated not just by water, but by the formidable Antarctic Circumpolar Current, a river of ocean that perpetually circles it. Narrator, Vo. Africa, too, is nearly an island, connected to Asia only by the slender 125-kilometer-wide Isthmus of Suez, a thread so thin that we severed it ourselves with a canal. But this is where the simple geographic model begins to fray. Narrator, Vo. Temporary land bridges, like the one that once spanned the Bering Strait, complicate this picture, having allowed humans and animals to walk from Asia to North America. Are they two continents if they were once one continuous landmass? Narrator, Vo. Immense mountain ranges also complicate this picture. The Himalayas form a colossal barrier between India and the rest of Asia, far more imposing than many oceans. Yet we consider them part of the same continent. Meanwhile, the far more modest Ural Mountains are often cited as the boundary of Europe. Narrator, Vo. And what about land that's mostly underwater? Geologists have identified Zealandia, a landmass 94% submerged, as a lost continent. Clearly, geography provides the questions, and even some of the raw materials for an answer, but it does not always provide the definitive clarity we seek. For that, we must look elsewhere. Narrator, Vo. The second and perhaps most powerful thread is history. Our maps are not just scientific documents, they are historical artifacts, layered with the stories of empires, religions, and worldviews. Narrator, VO, the division of Europe and Asia is the perfect example. Geographically, they are one unbroken supercontinent, Eurasia, so why the split? Narrator, VO. The answer is a line drawn not on the earth but in the mind by ancient Greek geographers over 2,500 years ago. For them, the world was centered on their home. Lands to the west of the Aegean Sea were Europe, and lands to the east were Asia. It was a cultural distinction, us versus them, that has persisted for millennia. Narrator, VO. The rise and fall of empires reinforced that line. The Roman Empire created a cohesive Mediterranean world that it considered its own, separate from the Persians and other powers to the east. Narrator, VO. Later, deep religious divides, the schism between Western and Eastern Christianity, and the subsequent clash and exchange with the Islamic world, carved that mental line even deeper into the cultural landscape. Narrator, VO. Over centuries, distinct cultural, political, and philosophical trajectories reinforced that line, creating two worlds that felt fundamentally different, even if they were physically connected. Narrator, VO. This is historical inertia. The idea of Europe and Asia as separate entities became so ingrained that even as our geographical knowledge expanded to reveal the full scope of Eurasia, the original division was simply grandfathered in. The way we see the world today is profoundly shaped by how our ancestors saw it. Narrator, VO. The third thread is culture and language, which act as the software for our brains, shaping how we categorize the world. This isn't just about different words, it's about the shared concepts and histories those words represent. Narrator, VO. As we saw with the Americas, language can quite literally shape reality. Narrator, VO. If your language is Spanish or Portuguese and has one word, America, you are more likely to see one vast continent united by a shared history of Iberian colonization and a common cultural identity as the New World. Narrator, VO. But if your language is English and it separates North America and South America, you are primed to see two distinct entities, often emphasizing their physical separation and different colonial histories. Narrator, VO. And this brings us to our final thread, pure convention. This is where history and language become codified into rules. It's the simple, powerful force of what we are taught in school. Narrator, VO. In the United States, China, and much of the English-speaking world, a 7-continent model is standard. In Latin America and parts of Europe, a 6-continent model combining the Americas is taught. In other parts of Europe and Asia, a different 6-continent model combining Eurasia is common. A counting method becomes standard in an education system and is taught for generations. You're a narrator, VO. Once a model is printed in millions of textbooks and becomes the correct answer on a test, it becomes a self-perpetuating truth for millions of people. What we learn as a child often feels like an objective fact for the rest of our lives. Narrator, or VO, geography, history, language, and convention. None of these threads alone can give us the whole picture. They are all valid lenses, and the right number of continents depends entirely on which lens you choose to look through. The result isn't confusion, but a rich and fascinating diversity, creating beautifully different pictures of the very same planet. In the end, the question, how many continents are there, has no single correct answer. It is a trick question of sorts, as the answer reveals more about the person answering, their culture, their education, their perspective than it does about the Earth's physical geography. There can be 7, with 2 Americas, and a separate Europe and Asia. There can be 6, by combining Europe and Asia into Eurasia, or by uniting the Americas into one. There can even be 5, if we count only the permanently inhabited landmasses as the Olympic movement does. Each model has its own logic and its own history. What this wonderful puzzle teaches us is that our world is not as clear-cut as it appears on a classroom map. The lines we draw are often human inventions, tools to help us order and understand a planet of immense complexity. These lines can be redrawn and reinterpreted, and in a world of many continents, however you choose to count them, this diversity of perspective is not a problem to be solved, but a marvel to be celebrated. We connect. And in a world of many continents, however you choose to count them, that is a truly wonderful thing.